Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's SANS webcast. Is your threat hunting effective? A new SANS survey, sponsored by Cyborg Security. My name is Carol Auth of SANS, and I will be moderating today's webcast. Today's featured speakers are Dave Ansler, CEO and founder of Cyborg Security, and Matthias Fuchs, SANS Certified Instructor. If during the webcast you have any questions for our presenters, please enter them into the questions window located on the GoToWebinar interface at any time. Please note that this webcast is being recorded, and a copy of the slides and recording of this webcast will be available for viewing later today and can be found on the SANS registration page. And with that, I'd like to hand the webcast over to Matthias.
Thank you very much, Carol. So hello, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, or whatever it is for you today. And I've got the honor to talk about our newest survey regarding threat hunting. It's basically some sort of a follow-up from the last survey that we had on threat hunting, and we're this time specifically focusing on the effectiveness of threat hunting and how to measure that. So let me see if I can get that to work here. Great. Right. Okay, so as Carol pointed out, my name is Matt. I think Dave will introduce himself at a later point. He has a slide for that. I'm teaching the 4508, which is the Advanced Incident Response and Threat Hunting class at SANS. And I'm also head of investigations and intelligence at the Swiss company InfoGuard, where I run an incident response team and I am a SOC. So that's pretty much me. If you got any questions, then just let me know in the chat. Let's get started right into the survey. So first of all, I think we need to talk about demographics to establish some sort of feeling on where the data is coming from. So the top 4 industries represented in that survey are cybersecurity, government, banking and finance, and technology. And I'm particularly interested in the results here because they're not coming from organizations that have nothing to do with cybersecurity. The majority of organizations even is in technology, and I would also call cybersecurity a part of technology there. And that's very interesting because I think if these organizations are not setting the pace on what threat hunting is, which organizations should do it then, right? So I think we will be presented with data from organizations that are probably pretty far into maturity here. So let's see how that turns out. From the organization size perspective, we have all of them. So we have fewer than 1,000 people in the organization, up to 50,000 and more, and everything in the middle. From a role perspective, I'm also very interested that most of the people that responded were directly related to security functions. So there were security administrators, security analysts, or managers or directors in that regard. And we had a few security architects as well. We also had some C-level representatives in the data. That's not in the top 4 rows here, but we also got that perspective, especially in the written comments. From a geographical perspective, majority of people were split all over the world. I mean, that relates back to the size of the organizations. If you grow to a certain size, you will be represented in many countries. So we also have that geographic aspect covered pretty well. Okay, today's agenda, for me at least, is the introduction. I think we're pretty much through with some of that. The key results that we got out of the data, we could have written way more, obviously, but we always try to get out just the gist of it. And the things that might help you to get better, might help us to understand how we can support that. And then the outlook. So where are we headed with threat hunting? What do I see on the horizon based on the data for the next couple of years? So, well, just to form a common understanding about complexity of threat hunting and how different organizations conduct threat hunting from a maturity perspective. So usually everyone heard about IOCs already, right? So the lowest stage on the pyramid that we established here is hunting only with IOCs. And there are a few things that I want to mention here, right? So IOCs are not wrong, and security operations centers use them, well, pretty much, to be honest, different feeds and so on. But if you don't curate them well, they tend to overfire pretty much, right? So that will give you a ton of false positives. The other thing about IOCs is that I've seen in practice is that many organizations and threat hunters who are starting out with threat hunting know pretty well how IOCs look like. They are also able to write their own maybe. What they are sometimes not aware of is if the tools they use even understand the different parts of the IOCs they write, right? So IOCs support like hundreds of different field types, but that's not true for the tools that check for IOCs in the end. The tools they might use for hunting, will it be like EDRs, will it be SANS? They do not always support all fields, okay? So I'll give you an example. For example, there is an artifact that's covered in an IOC rule that's called imp hash, which is essentially a hash of all the imported DLLs of an executable. So it's some sort of a similarity measure between different executables. And you can put that into an IOC, but there is rarely ever a tool that really checks for the import hash. There are a few, but not every tool can do that. So effectively, what I've seen a lot is that people are shooting IOCs at their environment without even knowing that 50% of the fields they use are not going to get checked. So in that case, you get the most dangerous thing that you can ever have in threat hunting, in incident response, and in SOC operations. What you will get is a false negative. And false negatives are really dangerous. So that's basically you believe you see something or you would be able to see something, but you just don't see it. And that's really dangerous because that blindsides you at some point. The other downside with IOCs, if they're not well curated, is they do not come with context. So in the end, what do you do with a hit, right? Is that really important, or is that from like an overfiring kind of feed? What do I do with that information when I find something using an IOC? So that's always a difficult question. Okay, when I go a little bit further up the road, by the way, the higher up I go in the pyramid, the more I invest into visibility as well, but I'll get to that in a moment. So we are now at the stage of curated IOCs. That means someone is taking care of the IOCs you're using. And that can be an external entity, and that can be yourself. I mean, the difference is you probably know stuff about your business that an external entity wouldn't know, right? So there is no one size fits it all. You do need some sort of customization and someone really thinking about it. So at that stage, you start to need like more experienced threat hunters to do that, right? If you do that yourself, you need experienced threat hunters, because who decides which IOCs to keep and which IOCs to discard? Now think about a very junior analyst in like a SOC function or a threat hunting function, and think of how their risk appetite is, right? So they'd rather alert one more time than one time less, right? Just to save their backside in the end. And for that particular reason, or that's one of the reasons why you probably want senior staff to curate your IOCs. Okay, once you have IOCs, curated IOCs, they still need to match your environment, right? Otherwise, they also will overfire. And the best example that I have for that is I've been working for Mendian for some time, and we did use a lot of IOCs, obviously really good IOCs, to be honest. But every now and then, an IOC that would work really great in one engagement would totally overfire in different engagement. And a very junior mistake would be to go through all the alerts that an overfiring IOC creates, right? That does not make a lot of sense, just wastes a lot of time and money. And that's what I'm saying. If that happens to a hunter in an organization or a SOC function in an organization, you just need to understand that you do not have to keep every IOC, right? Just because it sounds good, it might not be the right fit for your organization. So that brings me to the next step up the ladder, and well, that's a very controversial step because anomaly detection sort of implies AI, and I guarantee you that's not really what I mean, right? So that's definitely not what I'm talking about. I see it more like an entry level to hypothesis-based hunting. So when you look at the pyramid from bottom to top, the bottom is very technology focused, right? You create something, an XML document in the end, for example, that could be an OpenIOC, a Yara rule, or whatever, and you shoot it at your environment. Very technical and not too much thinking about it. Anomaly detection, when you're at that step, you probably got a better idea of what you want to look at, right? Because where could I see anomalies? Or in other terms, what in our organization is really baselined, which is something that's very dynamic, right? Some organizations have very strict process how their different endpoints look. Some others do not have that. Some have a very strict separation or segregation of their network, others don't. So you really need to think about where you can really apply your anomaly detection. So I'm not talking about AI. Matter of factly, I've seen many breaches that happened without the appliances, different kind of AI and ML appliances noticing it. And the reasons for that are very different, right? So some of the breaches, the appliances would actually have detected. The problem was they tended to overfire so much that no one was really watching the alerts anymore. So historically, we could find alerts that could have tipped the organization off, and we confronted them and said, well, you know, why didn't you see that? I mean, it's right there. But what we did is we were specifically looking for callback IP addresses, and their log management solution just returned that their AI solution found that. But on the other hand, once they told us why they didn't see it, we figured out that this solution was firing like 1,000 alerts at 3 analysts a day. So they just had to tune it down very much, and it was not a big help either. Okay, so I'm talking about other things. I'm talking about stacking, for example. So I call that dynamic baselining usually. So that means you're looking, for example, at the full population of a certain artifact. So that artifact could, for example, be all executables that auto start in Windows, right? Be it services, be it scheduled tasks, and so on, run keys. And then I stack them, and I want to figure out what's rare in that organization. And that sort of gives me the opportunity to go for the least frequency of occurrence, which is a very powerful measure to do anomaly detection. But that indicates that you might need some sort of experience to do that. So for an IOC, it's a yes/no decision. Either it hits or it does not hit. For anomaly detection, that border is way more fluent. And the masterclass thing for threat hunting is hypothesis-based hunting. And in that case, you totally differentiate between the technical aspects and the organizational aspects in a way. So you know, or you try to understand how a certain attack path is going to work, and out of that you create a hypothesis. So for example, Manny brought out a nice report beginning of that month about the Maze malware. So that's ransomware that's spread pretty badly, pretty much around the world by an organization that uses certain measures. And at the bottom of that article, they have a lot of TTPs. Well, not really TTPs in a structured way, but they tell you, okay, we found this and that control file, BAT files, PowerShell files that the attackers used. So a hypothesis that you can form is, I believe these guys are already in my network, right? So if that hypothesis is true, what do I expect to see, right? So you go back to that Mannion report and many other reports that cover the same kind of attack group. And then you try to figure out how can I establish the visibility in my network to even get the data that I need to prove or disprove this hypothesis. So that's the important thing about hypothesis-based hunting. I can form a hypothesis before I even know how I will get the data I need in the organization. So if you do not find an attacker with that approach, at least it gives you an indication if you have visibility gaps. Because if you realize that you do not even have the ability to figure out if that hypothesis is true, that would mean that the attacker would go undetected as well, right? So that means your next investment must go into the direction of visibility. So that's the high value of hypothesis-based hunting there. But let's get right to the numbers and see how many people are already conducting hypothesis-based hunting. Well, let me see. I think, yeah, no, it works. All right, I have a nice example. Forgot about that. Sorry for that. This would be an example for two different kind of IOCs. I'm not talking open IOC here, but nevertheless, it's just a rule set. In that case, it would be Splunk rules or a Splunk query. To be honest, the upper one, the simple detection query, is one that it can load right off the internet, right? And frankly, it takes long because it has a ton of text matching, and text matching is one of the more expensive operations that you can do in every database. The other one, the more advanced detection query down here, is a little bit more specific. You can also see that the sections of the base 64 encoded stuff in here are a little bit shorter. So in that case, the same query on the same kind of lab system takes 67 seconds instead of 412 seconds. So now when you're thinking about a more extensive kind of hunt or about SOC operations, that's a huge difference, especially if you have to do that for 100 customers, right? So then that really counts. On the other hand, more specific queries also lead to a lower false positive rate, right? I mean, you always have to check that against the other side. You also do not want to have a false negative, so you really have to check it against the threat. But in general, that's what you want to do. Obviously, obviously the second one looks way more complex. So I could probably write the first one in Splunk. I'm not a Splunky, right? I every now and then use it, and I appreciate it, but it's just not the tool I regularly use. The other query, I couldn't do that, right? So that would be too complex for me, but that's why in my team, have someone who is specialized in Splunk. I just need them because I can't do it. And that's true for more than just one technology, because every now and then in an incident response investigation, or especially if you have outsourced threat hunting, you need to hunt on infrastructure that's not yours. And that's configured differently. That's maybe not the product you use regularly. And for that, you need people who can deal with that. Okay, so let's get into the numbers. First of all, we asked how many organizations are really conducting threat hunting. And actually, 65% does not look too bad, right? Who do that already. But going back to the demographics of that survey, that said, okay, we have the tech and the cybersecurity industry in there as a majority. Regarding that number, I think 65% is pretty low, actually. Well, 29% plan to start it in the next 12 months, but you know how it is with planning. I'm really curious how it turns out in the next survey. We're going to ask the same thing in the next survey that will probably start pretty soon, and let's see if the numbers changed at all. The very interesting thing is, even though many of the organizations that we asked are doing that, only 11% said they are very mature in what they're doing. And experience showed that this kind of like self-judging is rather on the good side than on the bad side. So the real number might even be lower than that. And just to give you that in in countable numbers here, 11% means only 18 organizations out of 165 who answered that question are considering themselves very mature. So there is a huge demand on getting better there. Okay, I'll show you the graphs with the other numbers. If the slide changes, let me see. 1 second. Yeah, there it is. So as I said, like 65%, 29%, we covered that. For 3.9%, it's unknown, which probably goes back to the fact that not everyone in the survey is a decision taker or involved in the decision-making process. And for that reason, we probably just don't know. But we still have 2.4% who do it and also do not plan it. It's probably not the cybersecurity industry there. At least that's what I hope. Going to the maturity, to the self-assessed maturity, 33.9% say they are immature. So they have very limited hunting with a manual process where they probably apply IOCs and stuff. That's in the text-based comments. So 33.9% as well are maturing. So they at least try to get better in some way. 18.2% say they are mature at the moment, and only 11%, so 10.9%, say they are very mature. And we, into the survey, we put in that very mature for us means that they do hypothesis-based threat hunting. So not very many are doing that. And the reasons for that are, well, many different reasons. So let's get to that. So the question is now, what tools are they using when they're doing that? So if we're currently saying, well, they are probably not doing it as good as they would love to do it, how or what tools are they using? So 84% use SIMs, IDS, IPS, or EDRs, which in general, in my experience, all of them are very good tools to do it if they are set up correctly, right? And if they're used correctly. But I don't think that's the reason why they use it. I think the reason why they use that is that's something that's already there usually in an organization, right? Most of organizations have SIMs now. A growing number of organizations have EDRs. IDS and IPS, well, probably feed the data back into a SIM. You usually do not look right at the device most of the time, so it sort of feeds back. The interesting thing here is 61% use in-house built tools and scripts. And you will see on the next couple of slides, people are totally happy with these scripts. And I concur. The only problem with these in-house built tools and scripts is that they are usually tied to single people or small groups of people who are even able to maintain those tools and scripts. So in other terms, when you lose these people, you will also use that know-how. So that means you are probably using that tools on a higher maturity level, but as soon as some people leave the company, you drop right down to a lower stage because you have to start from the beginning. Again, I love those tools in an incident response. I do use a lot of self-built tools and scripts. I think that's what everyone does, but it's nothing you would build your internal security team on and expect it to remain there forever. The interesting thing is currently in threat hunting, so we're talking about threat hunting, only 33% use AI and ML-based, so machine learning-based solutions. Let's get to the numbers because I think we need to expand on that a little bit. Hello? Okay, there we go. So we asked for the current state and for what they're going to do in the next 12 months. And I just focus on the top numbers here. In the report, obviously, you will have more time to look at the full graph. So as I pointed out, automated alerting tools like SIEM and so on make up 84.6% for the current setup. Very interestingly is that the absolute leader for investments in the next 12 months is artificial intelligence and machine learning tools. And please keep that number in the back of your minds. That brings me back to the current state. Again, number 2 here is those customizable scripts. And well, then there's a 5% gap in before we get to the next one. So that's very interesting there. But how satisfied are the people with these tools? That's also an interesting question because in my mind, satisfaction, if you judge it correctly, should influence your buying decisions. And now that's very interesting because if you look at the left-hand graph, that would be the people who clicked on I'm highly satisfied with a certain tool. And the number that comes in second, well, 2.9 here is others, right? So I don't know what that is. But other than that, the lowest is at 13.7% artificial intelligence and machine learning tools. And that's interesting, sort of. So people tend to buy that in the next 12 months. And on the other side, they're not really satisfied with it. So that's something I find very curious. But it reflects the buying decisions that I observed over the last couple of years. Because AI and ML currently is very flashy and very cool, but I do believe threat hunters will not be out of work in any time soon. So I don't see that happening just because of what I saw in many breaches. So I'd still rely on real intelligence rather than artificial intelligence when it comes to hunting, There are usages for artificial intelligence, but if you expect it to make good decisions in threat hunting, then try to talk to Siri and make her do whatever you want to do. That usually does not work as well as it's in the ads on the media. Okay, oops, sorry, I jumped one. So one thing is, I jumped two actually, sorry. One thing that's a problem for organizations right now is the lack of skilled staff. Because as I pointed out, I'd rather invest into intelligence than into artificial intelligence. The problem is there are not enough skilled people around there. Because you see many organizations, 29% of the organizations we asked are planning to start threat hunting in the next 12 months. And I'm always asking myself, so how are they gonna staff their threat hunting operations? Because that's a huge problem, and a problem my organization is suffering from as well, because we really have a hard time getting the right people. And if we say, okay, we take junior people and we train them and get them to a point where they will be good threat hunters, that takes you like 3, 4, 5 years, right? And that's just a lot of time and a lot of investment. Okay. The other thing is 51% see budget constraints holding them back, which sort of relates to the 72% of the skilled staff, because if the staff is rare, I mean, that's the law of the market. If whatever you want to buy is rare, you better pay a good price for it. And the other thing is tools. Obviously, if you can't invest into the right tooling, you're probably going to have a problem in building up your threat hunting operations. The thing here is, I do believe that a good tooling can definitely reduce the need for staff. Not totally, but you can at least reduce that to a certain amount. So in other terms, when you have like a certain thing that you want to do in hunting, like going back to that Maze report, so what I would want to do reading through that report was probably going looking for all executable files and batch files in the Windows 10 directory. So if I want to do that, then there is a huge difference between different tools. So I've seen that happen from like getting the results in like 2 or 3 minutes to getting the results in a day or more, right? So if you got the tools that can do it in 2 minutes, you obviously might save on personnel there. So that's a very important thing to understand. Then the other thing is a lack of defined processes. And the thing is, organizations today work in a way that they're strongly relying on processes, especially when it comes to funding, right? So that process focus might also lead back to the budget constraints here. And the funny thing is, what you could do, other than just going for the tools, is falling back to the intelligence-based providers, right? So that means that instead of people, you can buy ready-made intelligence that might help you to save on personnel. But the funny thing is, the only intelligence that scored over 30% of satisfaction rating, of high satisfaction rating, is intelligence confidentially shared by the government, which is also very interesting. So here are the numbers. So lack of skilled staff and so on. Going down, legal limitations does not seem to be a huge problem. I think that depends on the country very much. And I can think of a few countries where that might be an issue. I think I got 2 more minutes, but I think we can finish that in that time. So threat feeds from a general vendor, threat feeds from a threat intelligence from a specific threat intelligence vendor also come back quite well. They have almost 30%. But other than that, it's looking quite dire. The funny thing is, open source intel scores with 23.5%, but in the text comments, people wrote, well, it's good, but only if you curate it yourself, which then translates back to the need for good staff. So that's also very interesting. So again, high quality intelligence and the right tools to deploy it can save on experienced staff. So that's what we are currently trying to do in our organization, because we definitely have a problem getting the right staff and getting them trained fast enough. So that's why we are looking how to tackle that problem from the intelligence side. that might also be like something that saves on the budget a little bit, to be honest. Automation is another topic that goes into that. It works pretty well for the SOC already, for threat hunting, not so much. So what we thought is, how is it going on with requirements? Because requirements might drive budgets. If I can phrase what I need, I probably can make a case on why someone needs to spend money on it. So only 20% have clearly defined requirements. And only 26 state that these requirements come from executives. And they are the ones with the budget, right? So, well, at least it would be good to see that coming from inside out, so from the knowledgeable people, but senior executives have to basically live with that and act on these requirements. But it's a good place to start with requirements, because that goes back into funding in the end. At the current moment, 83% stated that the threat hunters define requirements, which I believe is a good idea, because let a workman choose his tools himself, and he's going to be a lucky worker, right? So they usually know what they need, and if you got experienced people, they bring a lot of value to your organization. Okay, so these are the numbers. 50% plan to, at least, which is good. Some have ad hoc requirements, which for me sounds like, well, I just saw a super ad and now I have the requirements to buy that tool. So it's probably not the right approach to have that. If you have it documented and you live it, you're probably better off when it comes to budget discussions. Clear requirements, we had that. Threat hunting has an impact on that. Sometimes the customer has an impact on that. That's usually for the outsourcing organizations. What I don't fully see is why vulnerability management has an impact on that, but yeah. So what I see in the foreseeable future is a rising of, well, better people in the industry, because we start to train people at school level, right? High school level and so on. So we're gonna have in the next couple of years very skilled people and young people who already have some sort of experience. And I also see a huge leap in intelligence, because intelligence can also save on personnel, and currently the satisfaction level is not as high as it could be. And with that, I lead over to the next part of the presentation to Dave Ansler. Dave, are you there?
I am here, Matthias. Thank you so much. I appreciate that presentation. And I appreciate everyone taking the time, especially during this very unique time in our lives, and certainly for those of us in the cybersecurity world. I know while we're probably all pretty busy, I know it's also changed things a lot, and so I hope all of you are well. For those of you who don't know me, I was a founder of a previous company called Foreground Security. This is what we did. We did threat hunting as a service. That was actually acquired by Raytheon back in 2015, and certainly haven't disappeared from the world, because this is what I love, and been involved in one of the main players in SOAR and some other companies. But my passion's always been threat hunting in general. And let me give you a quick little history here of like where we started in this. You know, we at the previous organization ran a lot of security operations centers. At one point, over 30 of them. And I was really frustrated with the level of success we were having, and the amount of alerts that were coming, and just kind of getting buried in that, and I wanted more data. And so we started studying it, and I started talking about this back at a U.S. government first responders conference in 2011, and only expanded upon that over time. But the most interesting part of that was we started looking at the incidents we found through all of these different 30 organizations, and you know, how many of them were false positives, how many of them were true incidents, versus how much of your time was spent you know, actually hunting. And on the left side, what we found was most of our analysts were wasting most of their time, majority of their time, 72%, on responding to false positives. The tools that were alerting based on bad content, bad indicators, bad intel. And when I use the word bad, I mean just not contextualized, highly concentrated types of content or indicators. And so the second question I asked, which was really important to me and still is today, is, okay, of the incidents we did find, and they come in different shapes and sizes, the very highly critical type of attack, the advanced actor that's going to cause significant damage to an organization, we would categorize those as criticals. And then there's highs. There's, again, very highly sophisticated attacks. They're proliferated throughout the environment, down to mediums and lows, which are more the run-of-the-mill malware and the sort. And how did we detect them? And what was always most intriguing to me was that 100% of any incident we had ever found that we categorized as critical was found by a human analyst, someone that actually went in and looked at the data and found the incident. And 88% of anything we had ever classified post-incident of a high was found by a human, and then it went down. And so what that told us is that the human and the ability to hunt for the true data that you needed to look for was the only way to find the true advanced actor. And so we set out through time to change the way we did threat hunting. And you see those numbers on the left, how much of our time was spent on false positives, how much time we actually responded to true incidents versus, really just having the ability to do free-form hunting and research was so minuscule, it almost makes the problem worse, versus where we got at the end was 50% of our time was spent on true incidents, 30% more of our time, 3 times as much time to do true hunting and research and reducing of false positives. And there's ways in which we did that, and we've only learned and expanded upon that over time. And it goes to the heart of this survey and what it showed. And there were some really interesting things that came out of it. But the problem statement for me is twofold. From a business leadership perspective, I get it. Matthias just said it. You need people. Everybody admits you need skilled teams, skilled people. And getting your ROI on investing in a threat hunting team is very hard to measure. The only way we really know to measure that is like mean time to detection, mean time to response, or remediation. And those are hard things to quantify, which I know sometimes executives want to do, and show me why my investment is valuable. And then, another thing that is coming across everybody's plate these days is, well, machine learning, artificial intelligence is the answer. And I'll tackle that a little bit later, and the misnomer that truly is. So the other trend I've seen over the last couple of years is outsourcing to MDR companies, managed detection and response companies. And while there's some value in that, an external organization that's just collecting alerts that are coming out of usually endpoint tools, maybe your SIM, and running automated content in generically across all of its customer base is not going to find the true highs, the true criticals. It's simply just not going to. And that's why the survey illustrated to me that most of you realize that. And most of you realize I have to have an internal team. I have to have a capability to do true hunting in my organization because my organization is unique. And of course, there's a lot of technology issues. You've got tools and you got to have visibility. Without visibility, you can't hunt. I'm missing the threat detail because I'm getting it generically. Those IOCs are very generic in form. And now we're trying to kind of process, size, or standardize how we do hunting through different frameworks. But how do I map that to what I'm doing? And there's a lot of just not, it's just not a standard process or an easy way to do this today. So it was interesting to me. I'm going back to a slide Matthias put out there, which was, okay, talk about maturity. And the thing that I take from this is the very matures and the matures only equaled out to about 29% of the entire responding of the demographics of this survey. That tells me that 71% of the entire demographics of this believe they are not mature. And it doesn't surprise me, and that's a very, very key stat to me because it tells me we've got a lot of work to do here, and I think we all know that. And on top of it, okay, what do I trust today as far as technologies I'm using for this? And the one that jumps out to me is the obvious one. Well, we've all deployed certain security tools. We all have SIMs, IDS, IPS, probably endpoint detection at this point in most cases, and we've deployed that. We deployed it well. I'm sure we could all argue that we could use a lot of work there. So what's the next highest? Well, the next highest currently is the hodgepodge. You have talented individual analysts or threat hunters, and they come up with their own tools, whether open source, their own scripts, their own ways to do it. And that truly goes to the heart of where we stand, in that we're using talent to create their own ways to do it. They're writing their own tools. That is not repeatable. That is not something that scales over time. And heaven forbid you lose the 1 or 2 or 3 or 4 people you have, and they move on, because now you're back to ground zero, and Matthias already said that. So let's kind of go through the steps that have to be there. So first, I have to have intelligence. I have to have guidance, because I can't do it all myself, on what's out there, what's happening, what does that look like, what are the indicators, what are the TTPs, and so where are people getting that from? They're getting it from open source rules that people have created, open source intelligence, whether it's researchers, it's vendor blogs, it's GitHub, it's social media, or it's sharing groups, which sometimes are more valuable, whether it's an ISAC community or something like that. But in most cases, this is a manual process been developed by the 1 or 2 key talented individuals in an organization. And they can only do so much in a day. There's only so much they can repeat. There's only so much they can gather. And to do it right, it takes a lot of time to do this, because once you get it, you've got to parse it. You've got to review it. You've got to analyze, is it attributable to me? Is it valuable to me? What's missing? If it's a blog or social media, I have to pull out the key parts of that. And again, time consuming, talent required, not repeatable. And if again that analyst leaves, we're back to the beginning. So to do it right, I have a unique organization. I have specific tools. I have specific types of data. I have a specific market I exist in, a specific geography I exist in. So I've got to test and validate that the content or the hunting scripts or whatever kinds of other key intelligence I want to use is properly created for me. If I've pulled it from an open source or from a vendor, I see this all the time. Vendors will sell you feeds. They'll sell it to you all day long, because if anybody's willing to pay for it, they'll sell it to you. And in 99.9% of the cases, when I talk to that organization that's maybe paying for a feed from vendor X, I ask them, do you turn on that feed? Do you turn on the content coming down? They're like, no, I can't, because it'll crush my system. It's a common theme I hear all the time, because that content doesn't have the true context, the true customization for your environment that's required. So to do that right, you got to test, you got to validate. And then here's where a lot of people fall down in that, okay, even if I have a team that creates that content, that creates that real intelligence, deploys that, now you've got a SOC analyst that's going to actually have to handle the results. And in a lot of cases, this is a different team. And so when something pops, and if it's not done well, first of all, you get too many false positives, and how do you sift through that? Matthias gave an example earlier. Or if it does pop and it's accurate, now the SOC analyst is looking at it going, well, what does this really mean? What are my next steps? What do I need to be looking for? What do I need to do? And I don't have the context that the person who created it has, so I'm not quite sure what to do, and now the chain breaks down, or it takes too much time. And the other thing that I see a lot of organizations fail to do is it's because it requires resources, is really building workflows and processes once something is successful. If I do get some successful content, well, I should be building it into a workflow, a playbook, a repeatable process, and with all of the next steps documentation. What are other attributes I might want to be looking for? Who's the threat actor? What are their next steps? There's a lot of things that could be done to make this a more repeatable process, and not require to rely on the talent of the 1 or 2 people you have. So again, I'm calling back to some of the survey results here. What's your level of satisfaction with your tools? Well, everybody's pretty highly satisfied with your SIM, your IDS, your IPS, because we've spent the most time trying to make those tools work. Your next highest one is your own hodgepodge script, because yes, The people who created them, of course, rely on them. Of course, they're customized to your environment. They're the most reliable. The places where people aren't as satisfied is open source intelligence, because it is very non-contextualized. It doesn't have the pieces. I'll go into that in a moment. Of course, artificial intelligence, machine learning, we'll jump into that as well. And let's talk about where most people get the source of their initial intelligence to create content, to create hunting, and that comes from feeds. That comes from intelligence on the outside, because we all can't do it ourselves. And I apologize for the bird chirping in the background of my home, like we're all dealing with today. So a lot of people rely on a lot of open source intelligence. 82% of you said you get it from there. I also go back to some of the other responses where you don't trust it very well. And we all know it's very generic indicators. I always use this story. You can send me an open source Intel indicator list, and I wouldn't call it intelligence at all, because it really just ends up being an IP, a domain, or a couple of other factors. And if you tell me to go search for that, well, what's the context behind that? Because if I throw it into my SIM, I'm going to go get all the responses of any time that IP address was seen. It's probably been reused. It's probably from Amazon or somewhere, versus it was really only last Tuesday from 12 to 1 p.m. that the attack was disseminating. It was only against a specific operating system. It was only against a specific market or a geography. And without all that context, I just created a lot of false positives and a lot of wasted work. Also, the same thing holds true from security vendors. They put out a lot of generic content, not contextualized, not customized for your environment, and you go down, kind of go down the list. So let's talk about a use case. This is a specific use case. You can see at the bottom where we took it from. These are the generic ones that are out there that you either get from open source feeds or from a vendor, or you're using some of the open source tools out there that take an intelligence and are supposed to kick out a rule for you for one of your security tools. And if you look at kind of the steps here, okay, let's identify the threat. In this case, it's a scheduled task creation for lateral movement based on a very specific APT attack. Of course, we need to look at applicability inside of our content or our initial query. We got to look at some of the behaviors or TTPs, and if you look at the right, the only behaviors or TTPs I'm really looking for is a create as a part of that specific APT attack. Maybe a delete was added later. But what's missing from that? So let's look at that intel a little bit further and put context behind it. Is there a specific operating system? Is there a specific geography or specific type of data, specific market it was going after, specific subtasks or other types of behaviors that we've seen? There's a lot of things missing from this. Have you validated it? Have you run it against a test system to make sure it's spitting out good data? Okay, what are the next steps? If that happens, meaning you find this, what would the attacker do next? What is that attacker known for, or what does that attack look like? Do they then create certain types of registry keys, or run certain commands, or move laterally? What are the next recommended actions? Because this is where it goes. You usually have a threat hunter create this. They put it into the system, and then a SOC analyst gets the alerts, and they don't know what to do next. They have to go back, get the context behind it, figure out what to do next. Those are things that should be there that aren't. And then let's determine the data requirements. Okay, I need to have the visibility to be able to find this. In this case, we know this attack, I have to have sysmon logging. So I need to be able to make sure that I have that data in my tools, or I'm not going to find it anyway, and I'm going to get a false negative. And another thing that we would recommend, and we do, is generate real-world events in a test environment so I can emulate that threat, so I know what it looks like in a log, so I can write a piece of content that knows how to look specifically for that nomenclature in my log system. But in this case, look over on the right, very generic general query. It took a significant amount of time to run, and it only returned 0.7 true positive events. And the time it took against the system, which is taxing the system, was exponential versus what should be there. Let's think about things that should have been thought about and created, such as applicability. I need to have a large Windows environment, or this isn't valuable to me, it's not important to me. What are some of the behaviors or TTPs I'm looking for? And in this case, there was some specific executables or executable batch files that would have been run. Those are standard. You might see those in like a open source piece of intel or a feed from a vendor. But okay, what happens next? What's the pivot point? Shouldn't we be looking beyond just the create flag? Shouldn't we be looking for other types of flags? What's the context behind this? Meaning, what are they trying to do? What are they trying to achieve? Who is the actor? What are other things I should be looking for? What are the pieces of content I might want to then run if something pops and I do get a false or an actual positive attack? So did I test that? Did I run that in the environment? What comes back? Are there other things in the rule or the content I should be looking for? And then, as I mentioned, because a lot of times the threat hunter is the one who creates this, but the SOC analyst is the one who responds or gets the alert, well, what do I do next? Even just recommended actions. Otherwise, they're stuck. They're just kind of sitting in limbo. So in this use case, in this example, we walked through that whole point. We validated the query logic, why, what's the applicability. We modified the query to find specific activity, running tests against it. We validated the output. And again, another key point here is well, a lot of organizations don't then, because that's just, if you have a hunter that does this and they find something, they stop right there and then they just go start hunting. But aren't there other things we could be doing? Like, let's expand attack scenarios. What are other things that actor might be doing? What are things of piece content we might want to be associated with it? What are things we want to be looking for at the same time? Are there other logs or data sources we need? Can we turn them on in our EDR tool or IPS tool or firewall? Then can we update the query for efficiency, accuracy, ease of response? And of course, then you've got to be able to deploy it, and you got to validate errors. And in our case, we will emulate the attack so that we can really optimize that piece of content. And this is just one. And then the other key part here is what about documentation? What's the hunt plan for this? What are the steps in this? What else would I do if I do find it? And can I then create that and automate that in a playbook in SOAR or a workflow or in a run book in a SOC environment so that, again, the threat hunter can go back to doing the job of creating more threat content? Because this is one example, and we need hundreds of these on a continuous basis. But in this case, you see the true positives came back at 71% by this much stronger piece of content. As a better example, with less time taken to even run it, less tax on the system. So it goes back to this. What do you need? You need talent. You need to be able to put the other pieces in place to create strong content continuously. And it goes back to the survey. All of you said the same thing. I need talent. I have budget constraints. I have a lack of defined processes. So isn't there maybe a better way to do this? Because there's only so many threat hunters that exist out there. And I go back to some of your other results. And here's the only thing I want to call out from this one. Which of the following have shown measurable improvements as a result? And significant was the attack surface being reduced. Well, and then some was just as high. Well, that just got changed by COVID. So our attack surface has exponentially changed in the last 90 days. And we all know that. And so the world has changed. So our threat hunting mindset is going to have to change. And we're going to have a whole lot more attack vectors to look at. A lot of you have said you do have staff. It's limited. It's internal, which is nice to me. I think you do have to have an internal staff, but it's got to be augmented somehow. And then we talk about how do we augment it. And if I go around another conference, thank goodness I don't have to go to one right now because they're happening, and hear one more company tell me they have artificial intelligence and machine learning, and I don't have to just go lose my mind over such a claim, it's the better for me. Here's my analysis. If I take the best human hunter in the world and I lock them in a closet with no access to external information, external intelligence, learning on who the newest TTPs are, who the latest actors are, they're worthless to me in a very short period of time. Because without them continuing to know what changes, what to look for, they're not valuable. So even when we do get to artificial intelligence actually working and thinking like a human brain, like an analyst would, it's not any good if we don't teach it what it is the latest TTPs, the latest things it needs to look for. So we have a twofold problem there. And I just put up some jokes about it because the honest truth is it's not there in general. And there's lots of quotes that are out there from very well-known people including Larry Page, it says, we're not even there at Google, so I don't know where anybody else thinks they are. And even if we did get an AI to work, it's not going to still know what to look for, because if a human analyst has to continually learn, AI engines have to learn as well. So that really just puts us with, what do we need? And the unfortunate problem is you need staff, you need capabilities, you need augmentation, and there's only so many threat hunters out there. So we're gonna have to train more, and we're gonna have to augment. And without putting a legitimate sales pitch into it, that's obviously what Cyborg is doing. We will create that content in a customizable, completely contextualized way that is downloadable on a daily basis. And it puts in all of those components we talked about, not just the basic types of queries, next steps, recommended actions, the context behind it. Even if you have an internal team, they can only churn out so much. We can churn out hundreds, just because we have a large team dedicated to that in a way to customize it for a specific environment. And with that, I'm going to open up the questions. And of course, for those of you watching this maybe recorded, certainly we're always open to questions, because this is what I love more than anything.
All right, thanks for that great presentation. We do have some questions ready for the Q&A. However, if anyone has a question for our presenters, please enter it into the questions window now. Our first one asks, what are your thoughts on MDR services? Do I still need internal hunters and analysts?
Matthias, you want to take that, or you want me to?
No, just go ahead.
Well, I think I mentioned it earlier. There's value in them, because again, we're all strapped for the amount of people we have, visibility we have, and having someone manage your EDR, manage your tool sets, deploy decent content, and respond to that is good. But I wouldn't call their content like the example I gave. That is very customized with all the context, all the added components, the manual testing, and the other things, where that's where you're going to find the true highs, the true criticals. Do they cover maybe the 60%? Yes, but they're not going to get you all the way there.
All right, thanks. In your experience, how many SOC analysts and engineers does it take to create a fully functional threat hunting team?
I think that strongly depends on the size of your organization as well, right? Because the bigger your organization are, the more diverse your infrastructure will be. And with that, you would need to come up with more hypotheses, because your attack surface is just bigger. But generally, you don't need many. You're probably talking, even for very big organizations, of like a single-figure number. So I think I've seen organizations do that pretty much with 3 to 4 people easily.
All right, thank you. Threat hunting can be difficult for a less advanced or mature team. What do you see as the most difficult or time-consuming aspect of threat hunting for an internal team?
I think I really tried to illustrate that with that one use case example there, in that there's lots of available open source intel, free feeds, vendor feeds that are somewhat useful, but to really do it properly and most efficiently, you have to have all that context that I put in there. And I always go back to the basic example of, give me an indicator and I search for it, and I just created myself a lot of false positives. But to do it right, I need to know all of the key components of intelligence. What is it attacking? How's it acting? What are the lateral components? What are the alternative types of things? What's the next steps? What are other pieces of content I need to be looking for? And that's a lot of time. And a small team doesn't have enough time to do that properly all the time.
I might add something to that. And the things that go together with threat hunting, we just recently had an internal survey going on, what our SOC analysts really would want to do more. And they would like to do more incident response and threat hunting. That means if we present them too much with these opportunities, they're probably not going to do the other stuff. It's a question of efficiency. So can a SOC analyst, for example, analyze a certain alert or a certain piece of malware? Well, definitely, if you give them enough time to learn how to do that, but it's not efficient, right? And that's what I'm saying. So it's also like some sort of keeping them to their job and letting other people do that more efficiently.
All right, thank you. I think we'll squeeze one more in. How many pre-build hypothesis use cases has Cyborg tested?
I believe our current amount is well over 500. But unfortunately, in this world, it's an ongoing daily battle in that there's new every day. There's new attacks. There's new vectors. Over COVID, certainly now the attack surface has changed, which means the type of content and contextualization has changed. And so while we have a large team versus just one organization have a couple of people, we can cover more, but it's a daily battle. And any organization who has that has to have that going on every day, and certainly isn't going to still be able to cover it all.
All right, well, that's all the time we have for today. Thank you so much, Dave and Matthias, for your great presentation, and to Cyborg Security for sponsoring this webcast, which helps bring this content to the SANS community. To our audience, we greatly appreciate you listening in. For a schedule of all upcoming and archived SANS webcasts, including this one, please visit sans.org/webcasts. Until next time, take care, and we hope to have you back again for the next SANS webcast.